two-state processes. Okay. Okay. So, although protein folding is very complex in terms of how the protein molecules get their structure from an unfolded state through their secondary structures like helices, beta sheets, and then finally tertiary structure, so that they'll have the functional form. But very often for small to medium sized proteins, so this folding unfolding process can be really modeled in two-state. Okay, so you don't really require more complex models than this. This is because the tools, so most of the tools detect very efficiently the unfolded state as well as the folded state, because these are typically long lived compared to any intermediate states, okay, which are in most of the cases very short lived, so that they don't really appear in the experimental picture when you try to understand the protein folding. Okay, so typically more often, so you have an unfolded state, so then it can go to a folded state, and then so this folded state is always in equilibrium with an unfolded state. Okay, so this is a two-state process where the unfolded state of a protein and folded state of a protein are in equilibrium. The moment you have this equilibrium, so you have forward reaction and backward reaction. So you can actually give the rate constants for the forward and backward reactions. For example, either Ku or Kf, or let's say alpha and beta. Okay, alpha is the rate constant for the forward reaction, and then let's say beta is for backward reaction. Okay, and so let's say we do a very general formalism. Okay, so that you will be familiar with basically how and the rate constant is actually related to, let's say, concentration of species. Okay, so for simplicity, I'm just writing this is A, two states A and B. Okay, so going forward and backward, alpha and beta. Okay, so then in the differential equations you can write dA by dt equals what? So minus alpha times A plus beta times B, right? Okay.
Yes, sir.
So everyone.
Yes.
Okay. And because it's a equilibrium, so you can write the equation, differential equation for dB as well. So that will be minus plus alpha times, okay, A, alpha times A minus, okay, beta times B. Okay, so basically, okay, so and because this is an equilibrium, so the total concentration of A plus B, okay, is always constant. A plus B is constant, so you can write that as, let's say, T. Okay, so then you can write dA by dt okay, so let's write B in terms of A. So then B is equal to P minus A. Okay, so then you can write dA by dt is, okay, alpha, okay, so then in the place of B, if you substitute that there, that it's minus bt plus alpha plus beta in terms of a. Okay, so in the place of b, t minus a, so then it's minus beta t, and then you have plus, okay, so then beta a, so then it's basically alpha plus beta a. Okay, so you can actually solve these kind of equations, okay, so which you have done in your earlier either bachelor's or masters. It's very easy, so I'm not really going
So
to. Yes,
that should be dB by dt then.
yeah, dB by dt, correct. Okay, so dB by dt, yes, I'm substituting here, correct. Okay, dB by dt is basically so yeah. Total. Let's say the total concentration of A plus B is T. So then what is a fractional concentration? Okay, of A, which can vary from 0 to 1. Where 0 means that A is not there. 1 means that the entire population
Sir,
is.
sir, in the DADT there will be minus sign.
Minus of alpha plus
Sorry,
beta.
yeah. So if dV by dt is minus and plus, so this should be plus and minus. My apologies. Okay, so let's say we can think this in terms of fractions as well. Okay, so then let's say if we divide okay, so then this will be dx by dt is equal to beta minus alpha plus beta into x. Okay, so this is basically differential equations where we have written the concentration of A is in the fractional form. X is basically the concentration fraction of concentration of A. Okay, so you can actually derive this differential equation. Okay, and you can analyze, and then you can integrate. Then you can actually get X in the form of. So I'm just writing the final expression, but then you can actually derive this. Okay, so where x0 plus beta by alpha plus beta. Okay. Then it is e power alpha plus beta times t plus beta by alpha. Okay. So this is an expression for x, and then you can actually plot this as a function of t, right? Fraction of x as a function of t. Okay. So x changes with time in an exponential way, e power minus alpha plus beta t, and then you have pre-exponential factor and you have a constant. Okay. So x0 is basically concentration of A at time 0. Okay. So x0 is equal to A at time 0. Okay. So if you plot, okay, so what you will find is that, so if the so let's say if you, okay, so you can, so this should be minus sign here. Okay, so in this expression, Okay, so the rate at which X changes is the rate constants, sum of the rate constants. So we have seen that. So alpha is actually forward rate constant and beta is backward reaction rate constant. Okay, so the rate at which X changes is basically sum of the rate constants. Okay, so these are called relaxation processes. Okay, so in which X not just depends on either forward alone or backward alone, but it's basically sum of the rate constants. So, and X in principle can start, let's say X can start at very low, means that there is no X to begin with, then B is actually converted to A such that the equilibrium is reached. But let's say if you start it entirely with A, then there is no B. So then A decays to an equilibrium concentration to reach B. Okay. So in either way, so you reach an equilibrium in the end after a long time, and then that equilibrium concentration is basically beta by alpha plus beta. Okay, so that is this beta by alpha plus beta. So this is the equilibrium concentration. Okay, so this is at infinity. Okay, of long time. But then X can in principle start lower than this, okay, or higher than this. So if it starts at lower value, so then actually it reaches this value. Even if X starts with greater than this concentration, it reaches. Okay, so both these X versus T have a time constant of 1/alpha plus beta. So that's very, very important. Okay, so it doesn't matter if you start with A, then it will reach an equilibrium where A and B will have, A will have this concentration and B will be T minus that. But let's say if you start with basically no X, okay, or X is 0, means that there is no A. So then X concentration increases or A concentration increases, that it will reach equilibrium levels. But what's important is that both these relaxations, okay, the rate at which they change is exactly the sum of the rate constants alpha plus beta. Okay, so you need to really appreciate. So this is very simple kinetics, okay, from your bachelor's and master's, but only thing is that now we have applied to equilibrium, and then basically quickly noted that the relaxation rate is basically sum of the forward and backward rate constant. Okay, so so far so good. So far we talked about only the equilibrium, so A is going to B or B is going to A. But then typically these reactions, okay, they have barriers. Okay, so let's say if you start with A and then if you have B, so typically they go through a barrier. Okay, and then the state with the highest energy along this reaction coordinate or in this reaction A to B is basically the transition state, okay, whose energy is higher than both A and B. Okay, so if A needs to go to B, so it needs to acquire energy called the acquisition energy. So that's corresponding to this energy difference to convert into B. And the same thing, if B needs to convert to A, it needs to acquire this much of energy to reach A. So, okay, so both reactants or both reactions A to B and B to A have energy barrier. So here we are talking about just two states, so separated by a single transition state, and this energy barrier is actually dictated by whether A is going to B or B is going to A. So the energy difference depends on for each reaction. Okay. So, and this energy barrier, how is it related to the rate constant? For example, this is A alpha with said A is going to B and beta is actually B is going to A, right? So this alpha then further can be related to the energy barrier, okay? So where it is, let's say the energy barrier, okay, EA is related to, okay, so RT, and then there is a pre-exponential. So the rate constant alpha is related to the energy barrier. So that's EA. Okay. So in this form, where C is the pre-exponential factor. Okay. And then experimentally one can find out this temperature dependence by doing experiment at different temperatures and then find out the rate constant. Okay. Which can be typically most of the cases experimentally accessible, the rates, and then you can vary the temperature, and then typically when people really plot, they plot for 1 over T versus ln A. So then you get a linear plot. So from this, you can actually calculate from the slope, so what is actually E. Okay. So this is very often, that's what actually people do, how to calculate the activation energy in experiments. Okay. And one of the parameters people always useful in trying to estimate roughly the changes in the activation energies.
Sir,
Okay.
sir, if the plot has a negative slope, this plot should have, and here it is drawn as a positive slope.
Yeah, so yeah, you can find out exactly. So it's fine. So I'm just plotting, showing it's linear, but the slope will depend on basically this. Yeah, you can
Yes.
actually do that. Yeah,
Yes.
exactly. Slope is negative, so ln A is equal to minus A by RT, right? So then if it is EA, you can really write, and then slope is actually minus. It's negative value, right? Okay, so that's only the sign, but mathematically both are equivalent. Okay, so one of the parameters people typically find out experimentally useful parameter is what is called Q10. Okay, so basically how the activation energy, okay, so or the rate, okay, will change. Let's say if you change the temperature from T to, let's say, 10 degrees. Okay, because most of the time experiments are done, especially in the case of biological systems, it's typically very close to 0 to typically 40 and 50 degrees Celsius. Okay, and then so it's always a good indication that how much rate changes when you change the temperature by 10 degrees. For example, let's say rates at room temperature versus, okay, rates at let's say 10 degree Celsius. So this is basically alpha by, okay, so alpha at T plus 10 by alpha at T. Okay, this is an actually useful parameter. This is sometimes it's called Q10 parameter. Okay, so Q10 is actually parameter. How the rates changes are the, what is the factor by which the rate changes when you change the temperature, let's say room temperature by 10 degrees Celsius. Okay, so this QT you can actually derive, simply substitute, this is a T, so you can actually write another equation. So this is actually alpha T. You can write alpha T plus 10, where you can actually literally substitute T with T plus 10, and then you can actually find out the ratio. If you do that, so what you get is this. Okay, so you get, and again, EA equals RT square Q10 by 10. So what is the Z? Okay, so this is simple few step derivation one can do by alpha t and then alpha t plus 10 is t plus 10, and then you can actually divide these two equations q10, and then you can actually get this. Okay, so this also basically tells us some simply how much actually the rates are dependent with temperature, because this parameter, okay, so this factor is directly, well, not directly, so the logarithm of ln of that factor is directly proportional to the activation energy. So that gives an indication about activation energy, you know. So it's good to have this parameter if you are comparing two reactions directly, okay, reactions. So then if they are relevant to each other, so then it's an indication that how Q10 gives a nice picture in terms of the rate constants. Okay. So
Excuse me, sir.
yeah.
So, sir, this activation energy, is this the change in activation energy when we are going from suppose the temperature T to T plus 10, or it's the activation energy at the temperature T plus 10?
Activation energy is independent of temperature. Okay. So let's say we have a reaction A plus A going to B. Okay. So activation energy is constant. What changes is the rate. You know. So if you increase the temperature, what happens is that the rate actually increases, but not the activation energy. Activation energy is molecular property, which is independent of temperature, but alpha, the rate of the reaction, increases if you increase the temperature. So, so EA is independent of temperature.
Okay.
Okay. So, okay, so that's clear, right? So activation energy should be independent of temperature. That should not be dependent on the temperature. Okay, and so another important thing when it comes to two-state reactions, especially from the protein folding field, is for example, let's say you make mutations, you know, protein and mutation. Okay, so mutations means that you change an amino acid in a protein sequence to a different amino acid. For example, let's say alanine at position, let's say 35 is changed into, let's say, glycine in that position. Okay, so this is called a mutation, for example, and such mutations would cause change in the side chain, depending on where this side chain in the protein structure. So it will change the properties of the protein, because now the side chain, instead of CH3, now we have H, depending on what mutation. So every amino acid in a protein, in principle, can be mutated into 19 other amino acids. And now you can imagine every amino acid in that sequence can in principle be mutated. So you can actually create a variety of single point mutations. So we are talking about one amino acid. Now you can actually imagine simultaneously changing two amino acids. So then you will have many more possibilities. Okay. So why mutations are important to study? One, for biological reasons. So some of the diseases, okay, are mainly due to point mutations. Okay, so point mutations, because of just one amino acid is actually changed to something else. Its entire biology, the function of the protein changes. So sometimes the protein becomes non-functional. sometimes it not only becomes non-functional, it actually creates a lot more problems, for example, in aggregation, okay, by aggregating, okay. So for example, let's say if you have hemoglobin, okay, normal hemoglobin is fine, but there is something called sickle cell anemia, okay. In the sickle cell anemia, there is one amino acid in hemoglobin is mutated. I don't really remember what is that. I think it's somewhere, I think charged amino acid to non-charged amino acid. Because of that, just one mutation, hemoglobin has high propensity to aggregate. Okay, it aggregates so much that it becomes really long filamentous structures. These are folded molecules, but still they associate with one another. They become long polymers of hemoglobin, non-covalently attached, and then it changes the shape of red blood cells. Okay, literally, if you see the red blood cells for the normal hemoglobin, these are biconcave in shape. But if you see the sickle cell red blood cells, they are really like sickles. Okay, so these are like literally like sickle cells. Okay, so just because of one mutation. So like that, there are many diseases. So another one is cystic fibrosis. So where this is an ion channel protein which transmits chloride ions in membrane, because of one mutation which causes huge problems for that cystic fibrosis. So basically a whole lung has infection. Okay, and typically people who have cystic fibrosis typically don't really live longer, because this genetic mutation, and then all the protein molecules come up with that mutation or become non-functional, have issues in these lung tissues. So in that sense, so mutations are biologically important to study. Why certain change in the amino acid, how does actually change its protein structure. For the laboratory experiments purpose as well is also very important, so that you would know, for example, like how to make, let's say, proteins more stable than their normal variants, say more functional, in the sense that, let's say, if they catalyze a reaction, can you make them more efficient? Okay, let's say, or can you make them more thermodynamically stable? Okay, maybe at the expense of a little less in function, but they are more stable. These are very, very important in biotechnology experiments. For example, we are talking about vaccines, right? So sometimes, let's say, protein-based vaccines. Okay, so where you want to have the shelf life of proteins much longer. Let's say once you synthesize these proteins, and then let's say you make them, so you want them to really functional for longest times. So then they need to be really withstand the time. So you want them to have higher thermodynamic stability. So then you need to really research by changing mutations without compromising the function. Okay, so in all these studies, mutations are very, very important. Okay, so let's say once you make mutations, so then what kind of studies can you really do? So one of the simplest thing is that, so let's say if you have let's say a native protein, okay, and then let's say if it has this kind of unfolding energy landscape. Okay, for example, let's say you have a native protein, and then you have unfolded state. Okay, so here apparently native state is higher in energy than unfolded state. That unfolding conditions. Okay. So now let's say when you make a mutation, okay, when you change, so it has certain rate of unfolding, it has certain energy barrier, okay, and then of course we are talking about unfolding, so we don't have to really worry about folding at this stage. Okay, but let's say you make a mutation. Okay, so let's say this protein from alanine to glycine, so its stability might be different. Okay, so then it will be important to study the stability. Okay, so for example, let's say this. Okay, under these conditions, or native conditions, we can actually write something like this. Okay, it's only depending on, we always write energy landscape depending on conditions. Okay, native, this is stabilization. Okay, so let's say now you make this mutation, so it changes the energy landscape. Okay, it changes, basically the structure is different. Means that in principle the native state itself is different because you have different functional group. One functional group is replaced with another. So then the property in the native state is different, the structure is different, so energy should be different. And of course, energy in the other state should be different. The question is that, so now, for example, let's say so this mutation is stabilizing mutation. Means the native state is more stable. But does that make its transition state and the denatured state is also to the same extent or not? Okay. So if all are stabilized to the same extent, so then you will have a, so where actually everything is actually shifted by the same amount. Okay. So, but this is not necessarily true for every mutation. Okay. So some mutations, so where the native state is stabilized, but the transition state might not be stabilized because the change where you are making in the protein might not even participate in the transition state. Okay. So if the change you made here is where the change is also occurring in the transition state, then the transition state will be stabilized to the same extent. But if the change you are making is not really related to the changes which are required to reach the transition state, so then the stabilization might not be same. Okay. So in this sense, people actually, let's say if you want to represent this mathematically, okay. Okay. So what we do is that, so you take okay, and then let's say if there is a change, okay, net delta G. Okay, so for this reaction, mutation you can call R structural change, because these relationships are applicable for any two-state reaction. So they can be other chemical reactions. Okay, so let's say you have state A, in this case, let's say native state, and then unfolded state. Somehow this mutation stabilizes. Okay, overall thermodynamic stability you are talking about, not the individual states. So earlier they represented that only native state stabilization, etc. But what's important is that the overall stability. Okay, because the protein are always in equilibrium with their unfolded states. So though their population is very low, okay, so they are always in equilibrium. So that's why we start with the two-state process with reversible reactions. Okay, so where both reactions are possible, although one rate constant might be higher than the other, okay, under physiological conditions. Okay, so let's say you take a protein, so it has an energy landscape. Okay, let's say U. Okay, and then when you make a mutation, so basically overall thermodynamic stability is actually changed. Basically delta G actually increased. Okay, So this delta G is increased. Okay. So now let's say there is transition state in between. Okay. So transition state is actually in between. Okay. So overall stability is basically the difference between the native state and the unfolded state. Basically the reactant and product, you can always call that. And then this is the overall stability. But the transition state is actually in between. Okay. So now the transition state is also actually stabilized. Okay. Stabilized such that, so this difference, okay. So this called delta, okay, G, the energy difference between the value, okay, and this is delta G, and typically you want to find out the differences in the stability. So this is overall difference, but then difference always with respect to this, so you put it delta, okay, means that delta G is difference between, let's say, one barrier is this and another barrier is this. So the difference of these two barriers is delta G prime or delta G dagger. And then this stabilization is basically delta G unfolded. Okay. So if the transition state is somewhere in between, okay. So if delta G U is, let's say, a fraction of delta G, okay. Oh. Okay, where is my phone? The emergency lights. So let's say if you have an energy landscape, okay, N is going to U, and then if you make a mutation, okay, so which changes the energies of these states, but we are basically representing with respect to N. Let's say if there is a total thermodynamic difference, okay, is delta Gu, basically unfolding free energy, that is this, and then there is a change in the barrier height, that's delta G dash, okay. So now, so it's not necessary that they need to be identical, but let's say if there is a relationship between them, okay? So is related to what's called phi, okay? So let's say if the change in the free energy is, let's say, a factor of change in the unfolding free energy, okay? Change in the barrier upon mutation is related to change in the unfolding free energy by a factor of phi, okay? So phi can be, okay? So phi value can be 0 to 1, okay? So it can't be larger than 1, okay? 0 means that there is no change in the barrier height, okay? So upon mutation there is no change in the barrier height, okay? So let me write, okay? So phi value can be 0 to 1. Phi equals 0 means delta G dagger is 0, means no change in transition state, okay? There is no change in the transition state structure upon mutation. We are talking about upon mutation. Okay, means what? So you changed an amino acid in a protein, okay, somewhere here, represented as, let's say, star. So that position, okay, is not really participating in the transition state. Means that that's far away from the transition state, that its structure is same as in the native state, okay, which did not really impart. But of course, this is exposed in the denatured state. So then this residue has only bearing on the unfolded state, but not in the transition state. Other extreme value, phi equals 1, means delta G dagger is equal to delta Gu, means that the change in the free energy is exactly same as in the same change in the free energy barrier, means that in this case the mutation position where the structural change is part of the transition state. Okay?
Sir.
So basically, yeah, just let me
Sir,
complete.
yeah.
Yes.
Sir, here the difference is in change in free energy. That is the term delta GU, right?
Yeah,
But it
unfolding free.
seems, yeah. But from the diagram, it seems like, yeah.
No, yeah. So sorry, I need to correct. So basically, this difference. Okay, so there is one is this. Okay, so if I need to correctly represent that, okay, so that's
Summation of change in free
that's
energy.
one energy. That's another. The difference is actually this, no? So this, okay. So in one case,
Yes.
this is this. Okay, so this difference, sorry. Okay, delta Gu, and it says here it is actually correct. The change in this. Okay. Okay, sorry for the representation. Okay, so let's say when phi equals 1, the change observed in the transition state energy is exactly same as the change observed in the unfolding free energy. Means that the position where the mutation occurred, that position directly participates in the transition state. So in one case, it's a native wild type amino acid. In another case, it's actually mutant amino acids. So these two amino acids are different in the transition state. So that's why the energies are different, and they're completely participating. Means that, so now let's say, so this is one of the ways actually people analyze to find out which residues are part of the unfolding transition state. Means that if you take
But
a
I
photo,
think still it's not clear. I think. I mean, from the diagram, still it's unclear that del Gu term. I mean, from the reactant.
let me write again. Okay. So now this is important. We are looking at only differences. Okay. So let's say let me write a larger one. Okay. So let's say, okay. So here the barrier height is this. Okay, that's a barrier height, and this is the free energy difference. Okay. So now let's say I make a mutation, and I'm looking with respect to N only. Okay, so the mutation changes the energy landscape. Okay, so now this change is delta G dagger. Okay, so
Now
that's
it's
clear.
yes. Now it's clear.
And this one is a new free energy difference. And we are talking about the difference between these two. So let me write. This is your delta G U. Okay. Okay. So the difference
Yes, sir.
between these two pairs. Okay. So this is one of the ways people actually try to find out experimentally.
May I ask a question?
So my board didn't want to stop. Okay, so this is one of the ways experimentally, okay, so to measure which residues in a protein are part of the transition state. Okay, so you have a protein of chain of amino acids which folds and attains its native state, but then you put them into denature conditions, either by increasing the temperature or adding a denaturant or lowering a pH or adding a salt sometimes. Okay, so now and to know that which amino acids get ruptured in the transition state, followed by the remaining or remainder of the protein, is people substitute one amino acid at a time painstakingly. Okay, and it's a brute forced approach, but if you want to really get the clearer picture of transition state of a given protein, this is the only way. Okay, so where each time you make one replacement and then you get the phi value. Okay, if it's 0, it's not participating in the transition state. It's 1, it's participating in the transition state. So like that, let's say if you have a 100 amino acid protein and then you substitute this as many amino acids as possible, okay, mutate them, and then you find a 10 amino acids which have 0 and the remaining, let's say 1, then you have those 10 amino acids are actually the unfolding, participate in the unfolding transition state, and then typically small globular proteins. So these are typically clustered. So you can really call that as an unfolding nucleus, means that these residues, if you are directly involved in the transition state, means that their interactions get ruptured, okay, before other amino acids actually participate in the unfolding. Okay, so
Sir,
this is called sometimes 5-value analysis. And very well known approach in the 90s to know the unfolding nucleus, 5-value analysis. Okay, but these are the extreme cases, but people have actually found 5 values in between as well. Like I mentioned, it can be in principle 0 and 1, right? So they can actually vary all the way, so 0 to 1, it could be 0.1, 0.2, 0.3, 0.7, 0.8. But typically they say that 5-0 means that it's anywhere from 5, okay, 0 to typically 0.2. You can consider this no change. And 5 values anywhere from, let's say, 0.8 to 1.0, you can consider this. But typically then the values between, let's say, 0.3 to, let's say, 0.7. Okay, so it's difficult to say that conclusively that amino acid participates or not, because its value is not close to 0, but again it's not close to 1. So then it's sometimes it's ambiguity, and these residues are difficult to really say that they are directly participating or their secondary effects, okay, which give rise to the unfolding transition state. Basically, the interactions are changed around these amino acids in the transition state, but it's not really belong to the unfolding nucleus. Okay, and the second thing is that when I said mutation, so mutation means that any native amino acid is changed into the other 19 variants, right? And again, it depends on what is a change. Okay, what is a substitution? For example, let's say alanine to glycine is a benign mutation because you are changing only methyl group to proton, not really big change. But imagine if you change an isoleucine to glycine, means that very bulky side chain is replaced by a very small hydrogen atom. So then there is a huge change in the volume. Okay, imagine, let's say, if this isoleucine is in the core of a protein, so then it might be really interacting with other hydrophobic residues, filling the gap and not making any void. But the moment you replace this isoleucine in the bulk, in the core of the protein with a, let's say, glycine, so then actually you are creating a void, empty of space. Now it doesn't really interact, so this void of space create its own problems, so then it's difficult to see whether that mutation is relevant or not, so when we say mutations, typically this analysis works when the mutation or the perturbation is smaller. For example, let's say alanine to glycine is fine. Let's say leucine to isoleucine is fine because you're not really changing the volume, but you're changing the side chain length. In one case, it's branched. In another case, it's linear. Or let's say if you are changing aromatic amino acid like tryptophan to phenylalanine. Okay, next aromatic variant in terms of both size and polarity. So, but let's say if you change the tryptophan to again, let's say polar or charged amino acid or very small side chain like alanine and glycine, then it might have detrimental effects. So this analysis typically works when the perturbation is small, so that you don't really change the whole structure of the protein and the whole stability along. Okay, because in all this analysis, what we are assuming is this: we are assuming it is a two-state reaction, means that native state and only the unfolded states are possible. The other intermediate states are not really existent, and it has a single energy value. Second thing is that we are assuming that the transition state through which these transitions N to U and U to N occur are exactly the same transition state in both ways. and also it's not really changed upon mutation. So if unless all these assumptions are true, or at least close to the unchanged, okay, are changed dramatically, so these assumptions, this basically analysis will not work out if these assumptions are not valid or if they are violated grossly. Okay, so but otherwise this is called again linear free energy relationship, where you assume that the transition state position is unchanged upon mutation or change in the structure, in other words. And based on these 5 values, one can actually find out, okay, what are the locations in the protein or in terms of amino acids which constitute an unfolding nucleus, okay, in a protein, so that you can really understand the protein structure and folding both. Okay, with that, this chapter actually concludes. There are 2 examples which you can actually read. They have really given the 5 values. This is actually, I'm talking about chapter 7 in Mayer and Jackson. Okay, so I forwarded that soft copy of the book. So yeah, this is coming from the chapter 7. So I'll send an assignment for this. Okay, chapter 7. So where actually the other examples are actually also talked about, but based on the general formalism of two-state reactions, which is also applicable for other biological processes like ion channel, ion transport through channels, and etc., and also to some extent cooperative reactions, etc. But I didn't really discuss that in depth due to lack of time. But otherwise, I have discussed this 5 value analysis, and then how exactly one can know from the 2-state picture of protein folding and unfolding, or simply it's protein folding. So there are 2 examples are given, 2 proteins called Barnase and chymotrypsin 2. Both cases actually, the picture is given how the mutations, about like 20 mutations for each protein, and how their 5 values are actually changed is given graphically in the chapter, which you can actually look at. Okay, I think that's all for class today. So Monday, maybe I'll start Michaelis-Menten kinetics, because without teaching that, biophysics, biochemistry is not complete. I think that will be the last topic I'm going to talk about. So Michaelis-Menten kinetics, and then some special cases, and then maybe 1 or 2 examples. So that should conclude the course. And then we'll have, you'll have actually a couple of assignments and then 1 final exam after this. Most probably I need another 3 classes.
Sir, I
Okay.
have a question.
So by next Friday, I think I should be able to conclude the course. Okay.
Sir, I have a question. In this case, when we are dealing with this
Yeah.
mutation, we are changing the energy of the unfolded states, right? So what is the reason behind taking this native state remains intact?
What is the point in taking?
The native state remains intact. They are not changing the energies.
Everything is basically relative. Okay, so the energy change is always relative. So it's not that I'm simply assuming that the native state is same, so that I'm calculating the difference. So finally, it's not important whether n is n in the mutation and n for the wild type and the mutant are the same or not, because finally, as long as I'm writing only the difference in the delta G, so this is 1 delta G, this is another delta G. Okay, so the difference of these 2 values are only I'm taking. So you can actually still write the picture separately. If you want to have, you can write these 2 pictures separately, 2 independent energy landscapes, and then you can write. Okay, so even if you don't assume that n and n are same, is not going to affect your analysis. You can in principle assume U's are identical. Okay, U in the wild type and U on this. But then the thermodynamic energy difference is basically U and N energy difference. So the analysis or the final expressions are not going to be different, even if you assume that unfolded states are similar to each other, but native states are different.
Okay, sir.
Because we are not really calculating the absolute energies.
Okay, sir. Got the point. So another thing from the last class, in the last class we were dealing with the protein folding problem, right?
Hmm?
In the last class we are dealing with. So in the protein folding funnel, the native state remains in the bottom of the funnel, which is
Yes.
a very narrow. So
Mhm.
does the native state has a specific configuration, or can we say it is residing in a very small conformational space?
Yeah, see, what one needs to keep in mind is that, so when you determine the protein structures, okay, structural techniques like X-ray, so they'll give you single for proteins which can be crystallized, means that they are crystallized because they are identical to each other, means that the conformational space is very, very narrow. But
Okay, sir.
however, this same protein, if you put it in a water bath, okay, not in crystal form, so now it will exhibit its dynamics. Okay, so now this conformational space is slightly larger than what the same protein has in a crystal. Okay, in
Okay,
crystal
sir.
means that they are identical to each other. That's why actually they can arrange in a periodic manner, right? And
Yes, sir.
also
Yes.
typically crystals are obtained at low temperatures. So temperature has an effect on the dynamics. Okay.
Yes, sir.
And so that's why when we determine the structure of a same protein, for example, by X-ray and NMR, X-ray will give you well-defined structure because it's unique at low temperature. Conformational dynamics is frozen, you can say. But the NMR, on the other hand, you solve the structure and physiological conditions, for example, like room temperature. Okay, so where the proteins actually do exhibit dynamics. So NMR, that's why typically when it solves, it will give you a conformational, an ensemble of conformations. Okay, and also along with the average picture of those ensembles.
Okay, sir.
So in that sense, the conformational dynamics is actually temperature dependent. I would say as you go to lower and lower temperatures, so typically these proteins do, folded proteins we are talking about, well-folded proteins, exhibit narrow conformational assemble, but the room temperature, they have slightly larger population.
Okay. Okay, sir. Got that. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, anyone else? Any other questions?
So I have a question.
Yeah, Mithundeep.
Yes. So why is there a limitation on phi to be between 0 and 1? Because it's highly
Oh, okay.
my a lower unfolding energy, but the barrier can be higher, right?
Barrier can be higher, and then okay. So
Unfolding
typically,
state can be more stable.
yeah. Typically, it's it's very rare. Okay, which do not fit. Okay. So what is the meaning of phi value? Let's say 0. Okay, or less than 0. What is the meaning of phi less than 0?
So this so phi less than 0 means if we consider a case where the unfolded state is more stable thermodynamically, kinetically the barrier is high, or the unfolded state is less stable thermodynamically, kinetically the barrier is lower than the original.
Yeah. So that's why we talked about linear free energy relationships. So typically, let's say if the transition state is somewhere in between in terms of structures, you know. So let's say if assume that ends are very close to each other in terms of structure, but now so they do separate, okay, because of the structural change in that amino acid which is substituted. Okay, so they grow separate as you go along this axis. Let's say reaction coordinate. Okay. So let's say this is highest. What you're talking about is that. So now somehow again, are they closer here? So they are very close in this state. Okay.
Yes,
So in this
that's also
state,
possible.
okay, in this state, this is the one picture you're talking about. Okay. So here, I mean that. So under what conditions you have, okay, so something is lower or higher, okay, let's say lower, and then this state is very close. So this is something like catalysis, right? In catalysis, typically you have initial and final states, let's say not perturbed, but the transition state is perturbed, right?
Yes.
Only in that case of scenario, you will have, in one case, the barrier is changed, but you won't have that kind of scenario here. Okay. So here, if the energy is actually changing along the reaction coordinate, basically, if you take this structure of N, okay, so along the reaction coordinate, if the energy is changing, as long as the transition state is actually in between these two states, so this energy gets only separated further. Okay, either it will be very close to this or it will be large. Okay, so it's very difficult system. So that's why it's called linear free energy relationship. So if it is actually they are separating, typically the difference will be largest if you are farther from the end state. Okay, and also in the WhatsApp, I posted a paper last class. Actually, I was talking about how, so let's say they got, for example, like by substituting one amino acid at a time. Okay, so these propensities for, let's say, helical propensities, for example. There is a beautiful paper in Science. There's a 2-author paper which I posted. That's where actually I got the analysis. That's where I explain you the reason how exactly different amino acids can have different propensities, and then why proline is exactly the other end of the spectrum and alanine is on one end, and then glycine somewhere exactly in the middle, basically with values of 0. Okay, so that's very actually interesting paper, so you guys should read it. Okay, if there are no questions, then I'll conclude the class. Most probably I need 3 more classes, and we will talk about enzymatic enzyme kinetics and Michaelis-Menten, and then I'll take a couple of examples and then some special cases. That should conclude the course. I'm sorry it's taking a little longer than I anticipated. Okay, thank you all. Any other questions if you have? Okay, looks like no questions. Okay, thank you and bye.
Bye, sir. Thank you.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.